Johannes, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me. But I really would love to just start with what you do, what your heart is here to do in the world.
Appreciate that. Now, I teach people how to breathe. But really, I think
sounds simple. Like, okay, cool.
Yeah, I try and keep it simple. And really what that means to me is sort of building it from the ground up. So like restoring the natural force of rhythm of breathing that we all have, but also working towards something that I like to call self-regulation. So eventually helping people maintain a level of well-being and maintain a good state and teach them the tools and the insight and the information as to how that works, empower them to do it themselves.
And how did this come about for you?
Good question. Well, I've been struggling with that myself, and I still am to this day. Is really, I think self-regulation is defined as one's ability to control and influence their level of energy, their emotions, their emotional state, their attention, their concentration, their focus, and just their overall like experience of the world. And that's really something that I, as a kid, as a teenager, but also as a young adult and moving into where I am now, it's something that I did not really have access to, that level of control and influence and the insight around that. And I think that resulted a lot in me seeking ways to self-regulate. Not that I had the language around it back then, but seeking ways to feel better or to feel closer to myself or to experience different things that were highly dysfunctional at times, right? Some of which were also beautiful, but it led me down different pathways, and I never really learned those key things about myself, right? About whether it's my own biology or my psychology or how they're interrelated. But I never sort of learned the tools to do it myself. I was always seeking outside. And I think as I stumbled upon this world of breathing, which is another long story, it sort of came to me clearer and clearer. Like I could sort of connect the dots backward, and I could look back at my own life, and I could look back at my experiences and also all the people that I work with, and sort of have a little bit more insight about how that may develop, right? And how that might work, and where we can just, do little course corrections and bring little bits of awareness to help us.
And so because you're a Wim Hof instructor, how did you get to that point in time? Like how did this like understanding of looking for ways to self-regulate and come back home to yourself, which I'm all about as well, is like, how did it lead you to find this breathing method?
Yeah. It's probably about 4 years ago, and I was already into freediving. I was into different yoga practices and meditation and things like that, but nothing had really gotten its hook onto me yet in terms of building a consistent practice, if you will, and taking it a little bit further. And I reached a real low point probably about 4 years ago, where a relationship that I was in ended in a really negative way. And it was a lot of self-loathing and a lot of just non-acceptance of where I was. But the biggest thing really was that I was by myself and I was living for myself, if you will. So I did not have anybody to share that with or to process that with, right? There wasn't really a community or a group of people that was around me. So it went quite dark for a while there. And there was a moment where I didn't really have any other way out, but it was also a place where I didn't have anything to lose, if you will. And I ended up back in the Netherlands, which had been quite a while since then. So it's been about 3 years that I'd been to the Netherlands, which is where I'm from originally. I left quite early. And my brother took me in and he introduced me to this guy that was called the Iceman. And he lived locally in the canals, and he also swam, like he lived on a living boat in the canals, and he swam in these canals, it was midwinter at the time. And it's just a crazy idea that someone would go and swim in the Amsterdam canals. They're dirty, they're really cold, but there was a story behind it, right? And the story resonated with me because it was very real and raw, and it was delivered in such a way that I was like, wow, like I get this, right? There's a reason why he's doing this and why this might help. So I tried it, and it was an experience that I hadn't really had before, especially like in such a natural way, in such a direct way, that I could look within myself and I could feel just a little bit closer to my center, if you will. I could feel a little bit more me and a little bit more in touch with what I lost touch with. And so I've pretty much done that practice every single day since then. Sure, there's been days I've missed and it's transformed and it's changed and I've brought in all these other different breathing techniques, but it's become something that's really close to me because it really helped me. And at first it just helped me get my head above water and just helped keep me alive, really. But after about 2 years of practicing it and developing it, I started to teach other people and I started to bring it into community, if you will, and into sharing it with other people. And since then, it's been a real roller coaster ride of, traveling around the world, sharing this method and working with Wim Hof too. And really what it's brought me much more than a breathing technique is a community and is a group of like-minded people, and is what I start to see and what I start to feel and realize what was actually missing, which wasn't the breathing technique. It was having a group of empathetic witnesses when something does go wrong, or having that safe, supported environment where you can grow and you can share and you can be, right? You can self-express. And that's really what I think the message around that particular method really embodies very well. And maybe because like its mascot, which is Wim Hof, right? He's very good at this. It's all about self-expression, and it's all about sort of coming from the heart. As you say, it's coming from your own truth and learning to just be with that. And I think I've built quite a skill in that over the last couple of years, especially since it wasn't a very strong muscle at first.
Yes. Okay. There's a lot of stuff that's come up for me. The first one is, I think a lot of people can relate to the feeling of, like, if we reverse back to 4 years ago for you, when you went through that, let's call it maybe a rock bottom moment where you're by yourself experiencing a lot of emotion, and then that led you to do that, go to Netherlands. People can relate to that feeling of loss, that feeling of potentially loneliness, that feeling of like not knowing how to express or who to go to and how to get support or what actually is going on for them. So how did that change for you? Like how did it help you start to feel into those feelings, or start to like move into that place to move through it? Because I'm a firm believer in, you have to like feel your way through. You can't jump over it, go under it, go around it. You have to kind of feel your way through. So how did this method or this practice help you to move through those feelings in order to come out the other end?
It's a really great question. And I think what we're touching on is trauma, right? And when people think about, or when I think about trauma myself, it's sort of this idea that it's maybe like a PTSD is how it affects us, right? Like the war scenario, or the victim of sexual assault. But actually about 70% of cases of PTSD have nothing to do with those extreme measures. And it just comes down to personal tragedy, which is something that we all experience at one time or another, right? Whether it is heartbreak or financial setback or an economical crisis that sort of pulls the carpet from underneath our feet. These things can be very traumatizing. And the body responds, right? The body keeps the score, they like to say. And that was something that I really noticed at that particular time, is that it wasn't the first time that I'd done something wrong, or that I was like thrown onto myself, if you will. But this time it was really my nervous system, and it was my body that said no, and it locked up, and it viscerally really, really locked up. And I think that perhaps the beauty in that is that it's almost like as if the body has had enough, right? It can no longer go on this way, and it almost just shuts you down. I couldn't function anymore. And I had some things I could turn towards. There was one night right before I was actually on my way home to the Netherlands, where I took a significant amount of SSRIs, right, of a antidepressant drug, and I think I needed to reach that place where there's such a level of disconnect, and there's such a point where it's like, I don't know how to do this, this life, this being in this body, that it was as if I had no other choice but to just be open to a new way, right? And that's something that I do feel, looking back, is that I perhaps because of this personal tragedy, I was more open to something where, if this would have been presenting to me at a time when things were on an uphill, I probably would have just waved it off. And I probably wouldn't have received it as openly, if you will. Whereas at the time that it was presented to me, it cracked something, it cracked a layering of that was frozen up, and it actually brought me back into my body. It actually brought me back into feeling and into like being me. And it was
Oh, I
this
have
gradual
goosebumps.
process. So it's this gradual process of then through that keep coming back to that place, keep coming back to that me that's within, and sort of unpeeling or unlayering all this armor and this stuff that I've been putting on to not look into there. And then that was a long process, but eventually I think that having a tool or having a practice, a method, a technique, a rock, yeah, that you can rely upon, that you can come back to, something consistent, something that's truly deeply yours, helps so much, because it's almost like a baseline. It's almost like an anchor that you can sort of refer back to. And as
Mm,
you know, the hurricane blows and everything just like life's a mess, but there's that eye of the storm, right? There's
yes,
that
yes, yes,
still
yes.
point within, and that's really what it showed me, is like there's a place somewhere within you, or perhaps way outside of you, that you can come back to. And let's move from there. Let's start there. Let's go there when the storm blows. And just to remember, just to touch that point was actually enough.
Oh, I feel it's like bringing up all the emotions today. So, what actually is the thing that happens with breath work that allows your nervous system to process trauma, to be steady, to bring you back to yourself? That's a huge
Yeah,
question, I know, but
it's a huge question. It's a really good question. There's a lot of people out there that bring up these kind of processes, and it's like, well, it's an emotional release, and well, it's I mean, it can be absolutely, but it's also important that there's a little bit of education around breathing practices, and a little bit of a sort of a touch base process, because it is not for everybody. But the beautiful thing about doing breath work is, and I've been in rooms and I've introduced this to more than 1,000 people at a time, and it is remarkable how it is so deeply personal for everybody. And so, as much as I think to understand the science, which is just where we're currently at in that paradigm, right, which is still lacking a lot of answers, they keep being surprises, and it keeps being like, well, what I'm trying to get to is, it is important that we assess what we know, but we also acknowledge that we don't know. And
yeah.
so my first answer is, I don't know, because I genuinely don't know. I've seen so many different things, and I've experienced so many different things myself, that I've read all the science on breath work that's relative, and I just haven't been able to pinpoint that specific point there. However, the side that I'm really interested in is the nervous system, right? So if we're looking at what I was previously describing in myself, that sort of process that I went to from a neurological perspective, and the nervous system it's this electrical highway that sort of communicates the inside world with the outside world, right? But it's also the first processing system within the body. So it's the first thing that receives information, and then that sends it to the rest of the body. So that creates the chemical chain reaction, that first electrical response, right? That creates the hormones that are released, that creates eventually the state that follows, the emotion, the reaction, the response. So the nervous system is very important in that way. And if we look at things like trauma, or if we look at situations that are perhaps overwhelming at times, right, that we can't actually process at that time, right, whether it's because it's simply too much, or we are not in the right environment, we're not in the right place, mentally, physically, emotionally, to deal with that, then the nervous system actually has a few different responses that it can go to. And one of those is known as the freeze response. And that is quite an interesting response. It's an ancient reptilian way of processing information. So a reptile is able to just completely go blank. It's able to drop its body temperature at will so that the predators don't actually see it. It's able to just totally disassociate from its own body. And humans actually have a similar response, which is designed for like near death situations, right? It's designed for when the predator is indeed there, and when everything is so intense that we actually just shut off for a moment, so that we don't process the information that happens at the time, so that we actually numb ourselves and we are not there for the trauma to occur. So here again comes the example of the sexual assault victim that will often say things like, hey, I could have fought back, but I just wasn't, I just disappeared. And it's, well, you did. Your nervous system at that point in time decided that we're gonna leave the building for a while, right? Which is a great response because it saves your life. But this can occur in many different situations. And when there's neurological, let's just say, tendencies, when the body sometimes forgets how to respond in the most natural way, perhaps because it lives in disconnect from the natural world, or just perhaps because we've had attachment relationships or early childhood experiences that haven't sort of set us up the right way, this response can happen quite a bit. And so, long story short, breath work can also stimulate responses of this kind, both good and bad. But breath work is a direct interaction with the nervous system, in a sense, because every breath you take in is a feedback loop to your nervous system, right? Every breath you take in, your heart rate rises a little bit, and every breath you take out, it slows down a little bit. So it's directly connected to this autonomic nervous system, which processes this information. So let's just leave all that and give a very basic scenario. Let's say that when I go through a traumatic event, when I'm in a car accident, the first thing I will do is I will create a bit of tension, and I will go into that perhaps fight flight state or a freeze moment where my breath is locked up and there's this state of shock, if you will, right? That leaves a certain imprint or a certain reaction within the nervous system, right? There's certain memory associated with that within the body that's perhaps beyond conscious memory. Now, if I then go in a completely different moment where I'm safe and my nervous system is actually in a good place, and there's potentially a good setting, a good setting surrounding me at that particular time, and then I start to consciously go, I can actually take myself back to places like that, right? Or I can actually unlock some of this neurological memory, or some of this I can touch this processing system, right? Which is the interesting thing about breath work, because I can, by changing my breath, I can actually directly start to almost communicate with some of these systems that are unconscious, if you will. And it can actually bring up certain things from the past, or it can just bring me an altered state. It can just take me to a completely different realm of experience. But hopefully I'm then actually in a safe environment, right? And maybe there are certain cues and certain triggers that actually make me feel at ease and then help me give a completely different experience to this particular state, to this particular way of being. And so
Okay, so I like this analogy of we work with this, because what I hear is that there's a rewiring that can take place. So if we're holding on to, say, trauma of a car accident because we went into that state, and then that's obviously that shock or that trauma that we haven't processed yet is now stored in our body somewhere, somehow. And a few years later, we tap into this conscious breath and conscious breathing. And are you saying that we transport back to that time where we didn't process that trauma and we can process it from a safe place? Or are you saying, or yeah, what, and it kind of rewires what was stored there? You know what I mean? Like, is that the release that takes place?
Potentially. And that's just one way of looking at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something I've learned to be aware of a lot is the languaging around this too. And the words rewiring and reset and reintegrating are actually not very accurate when it comes to the body and the way it processes. I like to think more about remembering. So the body knows, it knows what to do, and that nothing is gone, right? It's just that there's a different way of acting. There's a different coping mechanism, almost, if you will. So we just gotta create safety for it, and we just gotta create an environment for it where it can actually remember how to operate in a more functional way. And so that's one end of the spectrum. There is this extreme form where you can take people into, what we think about as breath work, right? In the circles that I think you and I might inhabit on a regular basis. Is okay. So you go into this exaggerated form of breathing. And indeed, it can bring up things like you just put into words very kindly. But on the other end of the spectrum, there is also how you're breathing on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. And this is also very strongly impacted by, well, not only your day-to-day experience, but by this neurological memory, if you will. So if I have the car accident, yeah, it's just a coincidence because I was in one quite recently.
Oh.
If I have the car accident, and well, what was interesting then is that I had both cars total, they got hit from behind, was actually totally fine. But I noticed very quickly, not immediately, but within about a minute of having this freak out response that, whoa, what's your breathing doing? It was all the way up in my upper chest, and it was kind of not even there. It was kind of this shallow sort of almost panting, and I'm be quite aware of this. But then I also noticed my heart rate, it's way up. And so my body is in a completely different state where it is not actually able to process information the right way. It is ready to survive, right? It's ready to sort of act upon things. Whereas what I needed at the time was just to come into a place of safety and calmness so that I could potentially heal or regenerate or be in the right place to have a communication with the lady that was on the other end of this car accident, right? So what I did is I just took a couple of really slow, gentle breaths. I certainly didn't do anything like a crazy, exaggerated form of breathing. In fact, I did the opposite. I did a very, very slow, rhythmical sort of 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out type of breathing. And I actually just sat there for a couple minutes to bring my nervous system back down. And then as I opened my eyes, it was a completely different scenario altogether. And it was no longer about trying to save my own ass from this car accident. It was actually like, well, what happened? And then as I got out, I saw that the lady in front of me is completely in a state of shock. And she was trying to smoke a cigarette. And there was so much going on. And I just sat with her for a couple of minutes on the ground and we just did some breathing.
That's the best.
Completely ignoring everything, everybody around us, right? And just
Wow.
completely finding this. And then it was actually over within the space of 5 minutes because it was just like, cool, let's call the tow truck. Let's exchange details. Let's get out of here, go home and be with a couple of loved ones so that we can just move through. Whereas, you know, what could have happened too is that I get into this state of shock and I'm aggravated and I'm not in the right place at all. And then not only is that having a negative impact on my own health and potentially my future experience every single time I drive a car, or potentially just how I'm breathing and how I'm thinking, you know, I won't sleep well. And the next day I might start off on the wrong foot and who knows the consequences of that. Or then I stay in that state and I go out and I yell at this lady and we're having this argument and it puts us both off into this cascade. It could have been a very different scenario.
Yes, yeah. It's so interesting how something so simple, just by taking some time to take some breaths, can put you in that state, but also impact those around you, and then the way in which you react and respond. I totally understand that. Like, I remember the other day I was having such a stressful day. Like I feel like I was like for like a good 8 hours just constantly on that fight or flight, just getting things done after the other. And I noticed like simultaneously beneath the surface there was just like my heart was heavy. I was like ignoring the emotion that was there, but I just felt like I had to keep it all together to keep going through that day. And my friend just like, she stopped me and she said, can you for 3 minutes just lie down and take deep breath in for 6 counts, breathe out for 6 counts, just for 3 minutes. It's all you got to do. And as soon as I did that, I just burst into tears and I was just letting it out, releasing it, let the timer run for 3 minutes. And then after I was done, I felt so much more outside of my head and just totally in my body, released whatever needed to be released. I didn't need to go in the story of it. I just needed to let it out. And I was good and I was in such a better place, and then I could think clearly, could actually do the stuff that I was trying to do like the whole day, but couldn't do it because I was like, da, 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 da. And I just came back to that place just simply by breathing.
It's a beautiful example. And how to human, right? Like who knows how to human, but some of the work that I'm doing at the moment with amongst others like the Heart Math Institute, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And
Yes.
so we're tracking things like heart rate variability, and you know what you're describing is a very what we call an incoherent state. So your heart rate variability is not in the place where it needs to be, which as they've come to show is actually means that there's sort of a disconnect between your head and your heart, right? There's an incoherence, as we call it. And Now that sometimes that's required, and sometimes that's useful because it can help you get shit done, basically, right? It can help you
Mm.
be a little bit in that fight flight and be a little bit more active. And but the results of that are not always what we actually set out to achieve, and it can have this, like what we see with tracking this over time, is that if we don't come to find moments where we, like you say, just for 3 minutes, just for 5 minutes, find coherence, which is, you know, the technique is as simple as breathing in for 6 seconds and breathing out for 6 seconds. That seems to be that perfect therapeutic range. It has these long-term effects. It really does. And so it helps you just find a little bit of reintegration, and just doing that a couple times a day can actually completely change the way you move through the day, which is, I mean, that's all you have in life, right? Is is the way that you experience your waking moments. And well, and your sleeping quality is affected by that too. So I think that's a really important point to make, is a really important essence. And people ask, well, how do you integrate breathwork into your life, and what are you actually looking for? And well, that's exactly it,
Yeah.
is learning to be a bit more aware of those moments when, you know, it could be beneficial to take a couple of those slow breaths, and then doing it a couple times a day. So just a few times a day, 5 minutes, finding that slow 6 second in, 6 second out, it changes your experience of life. Let's just say that.
Yes. Yeah. How does this affect our health?
Mm. Well, that's a good question. So it all starts with the breath, right? Like
Mm.
your entire metabolic chain. I call it the respiratory chain, which is anything from the air you breathe outside all the way down into the cells, where you have these like little mitochondria that create energy, and energy is eventually what we run on, right? ATP. And so oxygen is the currency. Oxygen is the currency of life, if you will. And there's another gas in there too called carbon dioxide, which is actually just as important. It's sort of the waste gas or the byproduct. But those two gases and the balance between them make up what we call homeostasis, right? With a few other things, the body. And essentially your brain, your body is always trying to maintain this homeostasis, right? It's trying to maintain this delicate balance of certain gases and certain chemicals within the body. And when it has homeostasis, all is well, and it can do its job, right? We don't need to have any outside interference into being healthy. But when there's a certain threat to homeostasis, or when there's a certain imbalance, which can be stress, it can also be that, for example, you're not breathing optimally, and there's a constant sort of fluctuation between those gases, and then yeah, it can have negative impacts. And I think the main things that we see when we teach people about breathing, about how to breathe, well, the main thing that I think I'm personally just interested in, let's say it that way, is anxiety, and is state regulation. So it's helping people come into that more calm place, and helping them get rid of anxious behaviors and stress, and learning to create a different relationship and a different experience of stress, which it's no news that stress cascades into, you know, a pathway of illness, of disease. And that can be very, it can be very personal as well. It's very much different per individual. It's going to manifest in different ways in different people, always. But having a better relationship with stress, which you can build by learning to breathe a little bit better, will have positive effects, and can indeed, as we're starting to see, counteract some of these negative impacts.
Yes, I love that. And I know that you do hot therapy, cold therapy. Do you do hot cold therapy too, or just cold?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Share. Let's
absolutely.
let's talk about that, because I want to know how they link in together.
Yeah, great question. So the hot and the cold, or the breathing and I call it exposure therapy. So exposure
Exposure.
therapy,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, cool. So my notebook, that's anything from, you know, I used to work with hot springs in New Zealand and Japan as well, where it can be like finding a cold environment or or a hot environment. So if I zoom out again before getting into the nitty gritty, which is obviously really fun, one of the other disciplines of homeostasis is temperature. So it's your body maintaining a certain temperature, right? It always has to be at about 37.2 degrees Celsius, and it's very good at doing that. It's very clever. However, if we look at the way that we've evolved, as humans, as Homo sapiens, or not even way before that, right? Just as beings on this planet, there's always been like fluctuations in the external environment that are then sort of responsive within the internal environment. So we're used to regulating our own temperature, if you will, and we're used to perhaps changes in the environment. You could call them stressors, or you could call them just fluctuations, right? So we're used to like maintaining a level of stability in a very unstable world, let's say it that way. And what the modern world perhaps is different in those regards is that things are a lot more stable, not in certain ways. There's lots of different stresses going on right now, but some of these more acute stresses, some of these more like, well, these are things that our body's designed for, like temperature regulation. So when winter comes, it gets a bit colder, right? And we adapt. Our physiology actually adapts to that temperature change, and we then wash ourselves in water that is cold, sometimes actually freezing. Or when summer comes, we're just a bit hotter, and again we change and we adapt to this. And this seems to be very, very good for our health, is to go with the seasons, if you will. But really what that can look like is to seek out some of these changes in your environment. So to seek out some of these environmental extremes at times, like, you know, getting into a sauna is a good representation of it. And we have like endless studies of the health benefits and just the overall improvement of your quality of life from sauna use. Or doing ice bathing, or, you know, the things I like to do, like go out into nature when it's quite cold and find these natural river streams, or walk around the snow even, or things like hot springs, like very mineral rich bathing environments, where again we're sort of able to manipulate the external environment, which works its magic on the internal one.
Okay, but like walking around in the snow and like, you know, in your bathing suit, talk to me about this. That's a very committed. But tell me about the benefits of that.
Yeah. So we've seen photos of Wim Hof, right? Like, I mean, he's hard to miss, where he's sitting on this glacier and he's meditating, breathing, doing his thing, and he's totally fine, right? But what we don't see very often is that this is actually not a crazy thing at all. This is actually quite common, and every single indigenous or sort of more native tribe that's still existing today, and we have stories ranging way back, have traditions of this, right? So whether it's in Russia, where babies are being dunked in ice water from a very young age, or whether it's in the Yukon or the Inuit, like in the northern Americas, they all deal with these cold temperatures, right? There's stories ranging back to the early pioneers of America, where they encountered tribes in the American winter that were living in their loincloths, right, in snowy temperatures. There's the Aboriginals in Australia that still to this day very often sleep with nothing but little thorn scrubs and brushes in the desert at night, and it gets to sub-zero temperatures, right? So all along the world, even New Zealand and Maoris as well, these guys have actually been dealing with cold temperatures for a very, very long time. So what's going on here? Like how? And well, a lot of the part that we're starting to see is that you have to actually like seek out these kind of environments in order to train the body to readapt to situations like this. And so one of the processes that's a bit more graspable there is the activation of what's known as brown fat. So it's called BAT, like brown adipose tissue. And this is a form of fat. Really what happens is the makeup of your fat changes, and it becomes more adaptable to cold weather. So it actually starts to keep you warm, and it starts to produce energy in a different way. And it, you know, your body, when it gets cold, it has processes like this to keep you warm, and it actually makes you healthier as well. So it makes you metabolically more efficient to have more of this brown fat. So what we're seeing is that when you seek out the cold consciously, like voluntarily, wittingly, then you can actually create more of this brown fat, for example, and your circulation also adapts, and you're able to become better at dealing with this cold, and you're able to reap the rewards from seeking out changes in your environment, fluctuations.
Whew. And so is there a process or a way in which we edge into this? Because I'm assuming I don't just like go to the snow tomorrow and take my clothes off and walk through the snow without any kind of
Well,
practice. Is that right?
you'd be surprised. Like, you'd actually really be surprised. And if anything, this is what's so interesting about the Wim Hof method, is that, well, they've been doing this for quite a while. People will go to Poland to see Wim, and there's no training process whatsoever. You literally just go and you just do it.
Mm.
And we do this with people here in Australia, actually, where we take people into the snowy mountains and you just do it. It seems such a
Mm.
there's a little bit of training involved. There's a couple of like processes, like we call it mindset training, where you're able to sort of bring a different intention into it, and you're able to create this almost communal tribal energy. All those things really, really help. But ultimately, just committing to the idea and doing it, you'll see that your body is far more capable of what we often give it credit to. You and I could go for a stroll up Mount Kosciuszko tomorrow. I have no doubts about that.
Except that my panic kicks in.
Well, see, that would be the only thing that we'd actually need to do some work on, rather than any of this cold training. But however, let's make it a little bit more real. So what you could actually start with, and what would actually help quite a bit, is to take some cold showers. So right now we're in a beautiful point here. It depends where you are in the world, but in Australia, the temperature is sort of gradually starting to fall, right? We've had a really beautiful summer. And like every year, we're going to have a really beautiful winter. But it is going to get a little bit colder, right? So back to my story originally about the seasons and the changes in the environment. Well, you can go with those changes. So if you use your shower as an indicator of what's happening in nature, meaning that you just use that cold tap and you don't inhibit that process, then right now you'll get, maybe an 18-degree shower or a 20-degree shower, which is perfect. But over the next few months, it will start to drop up a little bit. And towards midwinter, you'll have a 12-degree shower on your hands. And what's really interesting is that if you start taking cold showers today, and that can just mean you end your shower cold. So you have your normal hot shower process, no worries, but you end it with like a minute of cold shower. You will see your physiology adapt over the course of just 1 week already, if you're not used to this. But then as winter comes in, you will go with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
These physiological adaptations will occur, and you will actually not only be more resilient to the cold, and you won't even feel the temperature drop really. And then when winter comes and you come to the mountains with us, you'll be a little bit more confident and ready.
I'll be ready. Okay.
But also, your metabolism will improve. It will upregulate. Your circulation overall will improve. Your skin, your hair, it affects all these kind of superficial layers as well. And your energy levels, your sleep. It's a powerful process, and it can't just be that simple. So for me though, what I think about with the cold shower or hot shower, instead of complicating it too much, it's just a connection point to nature. That's all it is. It's just having that natural flow of water, which we as humans have always gone with the seasons, right? We've always washed ourselves in natural water, and we've always like adhered to what nature provides. And yeah, when winter comes, like we get a little bit colder.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. Okay, so I have practiced cold showers before, and I found like doing the breathing method first. So typically what I would do, I was living in Canada for a while, so the water in Canada actually scared me at one point when I accidentally turned it to cold and squealed. But I started practicing the breathing in the shower, and then at the end of the shower I'd move it to cold for 1 minute. And what is it? Why does the breathing make it easier? Because I always find that if I can do like, even if I sit and do my breathing stuff first for 10 minutes and then I go and take a cold shower, it's significantly easier than to just like jump into the shower and into a cold shower.
Cool. Well, first of all, like, again, back to that mindset component, you've now anchored in a positive hook, if you will. You've said, now when I do this breathing, it is going to make the cold shower easier. So you set this clear intention, which is probably 50% of it, right? It's almost this. Well, you could link it a little bit to the placebo response, almost, where you're saying this is going to help this. And the reason why I say that is because there isn't actually clear evidence that this breathing method would help you sit through the cold easier. So a lot of it is the belief that you have in it working. Now, what we have seen in scientific studies is that by over breathing, so by doing this form of what we call it is superventilation, right? Just as a term. So it's this breathing more than your body is metabolically demanding of you at any given time. So over breathing, you can actually get rid of carbon dioxide. So you can choose to blow off all this carbon dioxide. which has a whole chemical chain reaction in the body. But one of the things it does is that it actually starts to inhibit the binding of certain proteins. And what this does is it numbs you. So it will actually numb some of the pressure receptors that are on the skin, which are the same as the temperature receptors. So theoretically, by over breathing for a little while, you are able to inhibit not only pain, but also temperature reception. So if you were to go, just before you go into any extreme environment, not just the cold, but you sort of get yourself ramped up like that and you blow off all this carbon dioxide, you would then be a little bit more numb to the sensation. And all that would do is it would stop just that initial shock response that you would feel because it's so cold. And if you don't feel that, you'll probably be a lot more calm with it, and you'll find your breath a lot quicker, which is what you really want to do when you're in there. So you just want to find a way that works for you to sort of ramp up that confidence, potentially, that belief, the belief part of the equation, and then see if you can find your breath within that environment, because that's what it comes down to, is that you get into an environment that's totally stressful, right? That's totally outside of your control, something you're not used to. Your natural response is going to be this panic and this, but you choose, and this is where a lot of the work happens, is that you choose a different response, and you find actually a slow, calm rhythm of breathing that's very reassuring for your body. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you bring yourself to that state, it is very resourceful. It is very much able to deal with even a frozen shower, right? It is not actually that consequential for the body. But what can actually make that process a lot harder is if you get this panic response. If you have a full freak out, there are no resources whatsoever. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So when you're sitting in a ice bath and
Same
you
thing.
find your breath, right? So you get in and it's like, ugh, and then you find or it's even like diving. What most people could relate to is diving into the ocean, right? And it's like, oh my God, it's really cold. And you kind of stop for a moment and then you just breathe into it. And it, all of a sudden, either your body goes super numb or you just somehow get used to it and it's fine. So I imagine that then an ice bath is the same thing. You get in and you find your breath. And is the finding your breath just a rhythm that suits you, or is it a specific rhythm?
You could think back to the coherence rhythm, which it's what I keep ending up with, because it's where all the science points to, is that you want to find this sort of about 6 breaths a minute, right? So this nice and slow in and nice and steady out. And that's really all it is. You don't have to overcomplicate it. A lot of these different breathing techniques and rhythms, they just do the same thing, right? They get us back to a certain breathing volume and a certain calmness and regularity of the breathing. So if you were to breathe, say, count in for 5 seconds or 6 seconds and count out for 5 seconds and 6 seconds, that would actually do a lot. That would help a lot. Now, a few other things you can do is you can actually smile, which is a bit silly, but it's been shown to release some of these happy hormones and sort of calm you down. It gives you that neurological feedback. Another thing you can do is to find a range point with your eyes that is not so much in the very here, which is more of a sympathetic drive, but a bit more expansive. So looking into a wider view, which is why it's so nice to do it in nature as well. Yeah. And you can also wiggle your fingers and toes. And there's a whole bunch of little tools and tricks you can use just to calm you down in those moments. But start with the breath, I would say.
Yes. Yeah. Is this why you're always smiling? I don't think I've ever seen you not smile. Just kind of it's great. All right. I want to link this back to the inner experience now. So how do you now having done this for a few years and helping thousands of people do this too, how have you found it support your inner world, your emotional experience, your connection to self?
Self-awareness.
Yeah.
And like building that self-awareness. So learning to look within is really where that started for me. So learning to have, let's say, established a few baselines of like, hey, this is what this feeling means, and this is what this is actually resembling right now within me. And from self-awareness, then self-regulation. So learning perhaps tools and tricks, but also just helping the body to come back to its natural way of finding its balance, of finding where it needs to be. And I think I needed to do that first to then go out and find my place within the world doing that, which is ultimately what it comes down to. And we can't find health, and even though our own inner world is amazing, we are created ultimately in all the biology and all the scientific aspects. They point in one direction, which is that we actually need to live in community and we actually regulate each other. through that process.
Oh,
So I needed to sort my own shit out first, and then I could actually be, and I'm still in that process every day, but
yeah.
aiming to actually be not only my own organism, but in a larger organism where there's humans interacting in healthy, beautiful ways. And it's where and it's kind of, I think once we get there, we can actually let go of all the work to a certain extent, because then it becomes then we're back to where we came from.
Oh, oh my God, my heart. I've just come out of a weekend of some deep healing stuff all around this, like letting go of the lone wolf, letting go of that mentality of you can't ask for help, to actually receive love and support around you from community, from squad, from friends, from family. And I think there's this, I don't know if it's the current climate we're sitting in right now or what it is, but there seems to be this breaking open of community and people open to receive that now. And so I love that you say that. And I love that everything that you just said, because I feel that I've had to, and I'm still in it, like go through so much of the breaking open to come back to remembering community, and remembering that we're not supposed to do this alone.
I'm with you, sister.
Oh,
and yeah, let's call it remembering. Let's not call
yeah.
it rewiring or resetting. No, it's just remembering.
Yeah. Amazing. So good. I really love your work. I would love to share it with people who are listening right now. So where can they go to connect in with you? You share so much epic things, and you have so many incredible events constantly. I was saying to you before, you just take up so much space in the world, and it's so impactful, in so many ways that you don't know, you're impacting those that you don't even realize that you're hitting. So thank you so much for the work that you do. And where can we find you?
Thank you. My brand that I'm sort of the banner that I'm flying at the moment is called Breathless. So Breathless Expeditions is what I'm really very focused on right now, is where we create these experiences for people where we can embody everything, pretty much everything we've discussed actually. So Breathless. And then I'm just on Instagram and Facebook and those things under my name, which might not be very helpful, but it's Johannes. It's probably in the title of this podcast.
Yeah,
somewhere.
link it.
Yeah. Cool.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. I'm going to link this up so people can find you. Is there any last parting wisdom you'd like to share with us, or an experience that you want to share with us, whatever feels right?
I think I'm good. I would just say, keep it together.
Through breath. Amazing. I love your work. Thanks again for joining me.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.